Good evening. This is Guardian Live, and our event this evening is about the climate emergency, talking about what next for the Paris Agreement. This is a momentous year for the climate. It's a momentous year for everyone with the coronavirus pandemic, and one of the many results of that pandemic is that we have had to postpone the world's climate summit that was scheduled to take place this week. It's called COP26. It's run by the United Nations. And at that summit, we were supposed to talk about the future of the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement, of course, being the global treaty on climate change that was signed 5 years ago in 2015. So that's not happening this week after all. COP26 has been postponed by a year. It will take place next November instead in the UK, in Glasgow. And so that means that we will spend rather more time preparing for that summit than had been intended, which in some ways could bring some benefits as we look at how to actually bring the Paris Agreement to life and to implement its goals. So tonight, that's what we'll be discussing. We'll be talking about how the UN COP26 can be made a success next year, what needs to be done before then, and what civil society, what individuals can do, what businesses can do, what governments can do to tackle the climate emergency. I have a very distinguished lineup of speakers for you tonight. We have Patricia Espinosa, who is the Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. She is a very experienced UN diplomat and has led the discussions on climate change at the UN every year. So she will be taking charge of the discussions at COP26, and we'll be looking forward to her insights. We have Nisreen El-Saim, who is the youth climate activist from the Sudan, who will be on the UN's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, helping the Secretary General prepare for COP26. And we'll also have for you Nigel Topping, who is the high-level climate action champion for COP26. We'll hear from each of them in turn, and then you will have a chance to ask your questions in the second half of the session. So I'd like to start with Patricia Espinosa. Ms. Espinosa, I'd like to ask, really, where are we in terms of preparing for COP26, and are we on track to fulfil the Paris Agreement?
Thank you, Fiona. Thank you for the opportunity to join this conversation this evening. First of all, I want to say that, of course, I cannot avoid acknowledging that we are not on track to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. I need to underline, as you have done in your introduction, the fact that the lack of meetings this year and the delay that we are seeing, no doubt, has an impact on our work. Before 2020, we already knew that we were in a climate emergency, and the climate emergency has not taken a break because of the COVID-19 crisis. So therefore, we are at a very critical moment. And yes, while our process has been affected because of the consequences of the pandemic, I can tell you that we have not stopped our work. Throughout this year, we have been working virtually like everybody else. It is very difficult. As you can imagine, multilateral negotiations and dialogue are, by definition, always in-person exchanges. So it has been a big shift, but I'm encouraged to see how good we have been able to adapt. Now, that doesn't mean that we are already on a clear path towards a successful COP. a lot of work needs to be done. And a successful COP needs to bring together many different aspects. It's important to understand that there is not one or two or three important decisions that will mean that the COP will be successful. Because what the world needs now at this moment in time of the climate emergency is a clear message that the deep transformations that need to take place in all areas of activities, in all societies, all across the globe, have started and are on track. And we need to do that this year. This is the signal, at COP26 next year. This is the signal that we need to give to the world next year. And to do that, we need to continue our work immediately. We need to start also considering all the specific aspects that will bring together an overall package of decisions and actions that will translate into this big signal to the peoples of the world. So we are not on track to fulfill the climate goals, but there are also good reasons to be optimistic. I am an optimist, and I think we need to give optimism to people, optimism and hope. But that means we need to deliver a lot of work from now until the COP26 on negotiations, on climate action at the national level, at the subnational level, at the individual level, and this is where we are right now. Very important, one very important piece that we need to deliver this year, and that will build an incredible platform for success next year, will be the compliance of the commitments that were made under what we call the pre-2020 agenda, which is the commitments before 2020, up to 2020. And that has to do with support to developing countries in terms of finance, capacity building, in terms of technology transfer. And that we still need to see a clear picture on how that is coming together. One specific point there is a mobilization of 100 billion to support action in developing countries regarding climate change. Now, one point I would like to make also about the convergence of the two crises is that this convergence is actually also opening a very important window of opportunity to make the reset that we need, to rethink our processes, to rethink the way we operate and the way we do things, and to make some drastic changes that will allow us to go towards a scenario where we are building a cleaner, greener, healthier future for the current and future generation.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And would you say that countries are looking to make COP26 a success by coming forward now with the kinds of goals and actions that we need? Is that happening?
Well, we are actually under the Paris Agreement. 2020 is a year where countries have to present new or updated national climate plans. And the process has started. We are seeing some updated nationally determined contributions. This is how we call these national plans in our process coming in. Not enough yet. And we are also seeing that in some countries, the processes are somehow being delayed, partly because of the pandemic. I can tell you that in some cases, for example, parliaments have not been in session. So what we need to do and what we have been trying to do is that in spite of that, the very broad technical work that needs to be made in order to put those national plans together that continues, that we continue to give support to those countries and to those areas of the governments that need to fulfill that work, so that whenever that is ready and whenever the political level decision making is possible, it is made. So I'm still hopeful that we will have, if not all, many NDCs presented by the end of this year. And of course, I certainly hope that by COP26, we will have all NDCs presented, and not only from governments, but also the multiple plans from non-party stakeholders, on which I'm sure Nigel will be addressing later on.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, we will hear about that too. And I should just mention as well that before COP26, next month, in fact, the UN Secretary General and the UK Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, are jointly going to hold a virtual summit for leaders called the Climate Ambition Summit, which will mark the 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement. Can I just ask what you hope for from that as well?
Well, I certainly hope that it will be a moment that will show that actually leaders are really stepping in and are willing to give leadership and rebuild trust in this multilateral climate change process. I think this is very important in order to really give the indication to the world that we are on the right track, that there is going to be leadership. And as you know, if we don't have leadership, and this is something that, quite frankly, in the last years we have not been seeing very clearly, if we do not have that kind of leadership, it is very difficult to achieve those very ambitious goals. In fact, if we remind ourselves the scenario that we had in 2015 when the Paris Agreement was adopted, there was a lot of leadership. We saw heads of state and government coming together, willing to engage and willing to demonstrate that that agenda was possible. And the Paris Agreement turns out to be one of the most important successes of multilateralism. So we need this kind of leadership. We need this kind of willingness to commit. And having the Secretary General Guterres and the Prime Minister Johnson convening this high-level gathering is extremely important to bring a platform where leaders can demonstrate exactly that, their willingness to commit, their willingness to bring the process towards a better world, a better future for these generations and the next ones.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, we look forward to that conference as well. That should be an interesting one. I'm going to move on now to Nisreen El Saim, who's joining us tonight from Sudan, where she is a youth climate activist. And as I mentioned before, she's also on the UN Youth Advisory Group on climate change. Now, I'm afraid that owing to some technical difficulties, it seems that we may only be able to hear you, Nisreen, rather than everyone be able to see you as well. So I'm really sorry about that, but we'll get on as best we can in the circumstances. And thank you very much for joining us tonight. So I'd like to know really how you are gearing up to COP26, Nisreen, what young people around the world are doing. And I believe that there's actually going to be a sort of alternative COP26 for young people in order to try and spur some sort of action around the world. Perhaps you could tell us more about that as well.
Thank you, Fiona. And I think these times actually remind us with the underprivileged people who don't have access to electricity nor internet connection. In a country like Sudan, only 30% of population have access to electricity in the first place. So I think being able to be here with you today is a bliss itself. The momentum to COP26 is very much dynamic. Although the corona happened, yet young people are very much determined in making their own actions and making things work in their own way. And one of these ways is the mock COP that you just mentioned. Well, I think the COVID-19 didn't only limit our participation, but it somehow also widened the range of participation, because not everyone, for example, are able to travel to attend the COP itself, but some people are maybe able to attend the virtual events and online events in their homes and in their homelands. Well, I think that the people who are coordinating the COP26 and the UK government have a huge mission ahead of them. The expectations for the COP26 are on the roof, let me say, and young people especially decided are very much determined on having no tolerance of having the very much basic needs that we need to keep the safety of our planet. Young people around the world are very much more organized and more focused on their goals more than ever. And I think we set many goals, and I think we will not take less than the goals. Let me speak a little bit about the Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Well, the Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change is a group of youth formulated by the Secretary General and the Climate Action Team in order to have a direct connection and direct access of the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, with the young people around the world. We are 7. I'm currently chairing this Youth Advisory Group, and we are the 7 representing all of the regions of the world. We have Paloma from Brazil, she's a lawyer. We have Archana from India, she's a researcher and indigenous community lady. We have Ernest from Fiji, who represents the small island states. We have Vlad from Moldova, and he's the economist of the group. Me representing Africa, Nathan representing West Europe, and so on. I think, I only forgot Sophia. She's from US and she's representing North America. So we are very much a diverse group when it comes to age, when it comes to background, when it comes to a focus area that we work on. Well, our main mandate is to make sure that diplomacy is used to deliver the informations better, not to hide the informations. And we are here also to make sure that at least people are trying to walk the talk. Instead of just giving speeches and having big announcements and so on. For example, we were very happy to hear many countries commit to have net zero by 2050. But in many cases, in many countries, such as Sudan, for example, who had devastating floods only a few weeks ago, 2050 seems very far and not enough, as Ms. Patricia Espinosa mentioned earlier. I guess also it's very much interlinked. Everything is very much interlinked. So access to finance, the availability of the finance itself from the first place, the definition of climate finance is a very key issue. Not only that, but political will for engagement, adaptation and building resilience, as well as mitigation. Because these 3 pillars and 3 chain is stronger as weak as the weakest coin and the weakest part of the chain. If there is no finance, then if hundreds of countries actually submitted a very ambitious NDCs and they don't have the capacity to actually implement the NDCs, then why they are submitting NDCs? If the countries submitted NDCs and they have the finance but they don't have the political will, then nothing will happen. We all know that. And if we have political will and finance and they submitted NDCs, then if it's a developed countries, then we need to mitigate, because global warming will take us to a point where adaptation will not be working, when the whole system and the equilibrium system of the nature will fall and collapse. I also want to comment that what makes the Youth Advisory Group very special is that our top priority is the planet and the next generation. And I guess Mr. Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, knows that, and he realized that because of the many movements around the world that talks about climate change. So he decided to have a very much frank and honest and a glassy eye on what's happening. So, for example, criticalizing some events, some documents, helping the SG himself to in different strategies regarding climate change and so on is one of the main mandates that we have. Well, the Youth Advisory Group doesn't speak actually behalf of the young people around the world. We are just functioning as a bridge, and this bridge is actually to link the young people around the world with the SG and the different action and momentum happening around the world. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Nazreen. That's a fantastic insight there into what's going on around the world and for young people in particular. That's wonderful. Thank you for that. I'd just like to remind the audience as well that actually you can send in questions now. You can send it in through the Q&A panel, which should be on the side of your screens. So you can start submitting your questions already. You don't need to wait until we move into the Q&A part of the discussion. So carry on with that, and I will take us on next to Nigel Topping, who, as I mentioned, is the High-Level Climate Action Champion, which is a rather grand title, and in that role Nigel primarily, I would say, looks to business, don't you, to bring businesses into the climate action fold, which is a great thing to do. Sometimes the role of businesses at the United Nations COPs has been a little controversial in some quarters. People have questioned in the past why some businesses are represented, particularly oil and gas companies and so on. But on the other hand, businesses will be essential to actually delivering the world's climate targets through the Paris Agreement. So perhaps you could tell us a bit more about your role and how you're going to make COP26 a success.
Let me try and explain my fancy job titles, Fiona. First of all, thank you, Fiona and The Guardian, for convening this, and thanks particularly to The Guardian for your commitment on covering the climate crisis in the detail that you do. It's always a great source of news for all of us. And Patricia, thanks. It's lovely to follow you. Thanks for your leadership, and thank you for the job you did on the session yesterday. It was really good. And Nasreen too. I'm really pleased that the Secretary General has convened such a strong youth council. So I should just explain a bit about my role, Fiona. So the role was created in Paris, actually, and it was created because the parties, the countries who are parties to the UN Climate Convention, recognise that countries can't solve such a big problem on their own, and they need what we refer to as non-party stakeholders or non-state actors, which means not just business. It means businesses, investors, cities, regions, and the rest of civil society. It's kind of everyone who's not a national government. So the role is broadly to work with those stakeholders to drive ambition and action, and then by doing that to help national governments raise their ambition and drive action faster, what we call the ambition loop. So it's not to do with the negotiations at all. We leave the experts, Patricia and whoever the countries the presidency are, and all the negotiators who have many years of experience do that very technical work. And I work with Gonzalo Munoz, who's the Chilean high-level champion who was appointed by Chile as the presidency of COP25, and we work with a coalition of hundreds of organisations who work with cities, businesses, and investors, etc., called the Marrakesh Partnership, which was founded in COP22 in 2016 in Marrakesh, where the COP was there in Morocco. And so really what we're trying to do is mobilise ambition and drive action by whatever means we can. So just to give you an idea of some of the things we're doing, we launched a campaign we call the Race to Zero in June. It's based off something which Patricia and the Secretary General and the Chilean presidency launched last year called the Climate Ambition Alliance, which is really about getting countries to step up and commit to net zero. And now we're bringing in all those other stakeholders. We set ourselves a task of 10 times the number of businesses, cities, investors and regions committing to zero by Glasgow. We've already doubled it since Madrid last year. We have well over 1,000 businesses, 500 cities, 22 regions, 500 universities, and investors with $5 trillion of assets under management. And they're all committing to robust targets. So we've got some very clear rules, science-based targets for businesses. They have to have the long-term goal, but also short-term action commitments of the next 5 years. So it's not just a punt to the future leadership. And they have to be committed to acting on those and to transparency, so you and everybody can, and all of us can keep people accountable. So everyone needs to pay attention to whether a net zero commitment is robust enough to be considered to be in the race to zero, or whether it's greenwashing, because there is some of that still going on, as we all know. And then we're working with every sector in the economy to try and build a coalition of all the major actors along the value chain, investors, cities, national governments, civil society, to agree what's the pathway to zero in each sector, because there is a pathway to zero in every sector before 2050, and we know that. And we already have actors all around each sector committed to zero. And in fact, we're right now in the middle of the race to zero dialogues, which day by day we're going through a whole series of conversations with many different people from different parts of the system. I had a pleasure of participating in a Youth Sets the Agenda dialogue yesterday, where we had 4 brilliant young youth engineers and activists talking to executives from some companies in heavy emitting sectors, challenging and critiquing their plans in a very constructive way. So we're working on those, and we're going to launch a resilience campaign to really target the need to mobilise much more action on resilience, particularly for the most vulnerable communities in the world. And we've got some great partnerships like with TED and YouTube and Leaders Quest on the Countdown initiative, which many people might have seen, to try and tell the story in a more vivid way to get more people feeling positive about the fact that we know what to do and are getting on with it. And one thing I'd really like to say is that I think it's really important that we actually back our ability to innovate a lot more. We're often very pessimistic about how bad the future will be, and we're right to be concerned, because we're not on track, as Patricia says, and we've already got a lot of climate damage locked in, and it won't go backwards. But we're also capable of transforming very fast. I'll give you my favourite example, because I worked originally in the automotive sector. In 2016, just after Paris, the IEA, the experts, were saying we'll still be building and buying lots of combustion engine cars in the 2070s. Then Tesla started disrupting, and people started saying, oh, maybe electric cars aren't boring and slow, maybe they're kind of cool and interesting and zero carbon. Then you have like France and the UK committing to phasing out combustion engines in 2040. Then you end up with Mercedes, the inventor of the combustion engine, saying we'll go net zero 2039. Then you have cities all around the world saying we're going to have zero carbon zones and we're only going to buy electric buses. Now you have a situation where California is committed to phasing out combustion engines in 2035. We're waiting to hear the UK's announcement. Hopefully it'll be 2030, but it'll be between 2030 and 2035. The EU will have to follow that because of their commitments. China's now talking about 2035. So 4 years ago, people were saying 2070s. Now it's going to be in the 2030s. The future's come forward by 40 years in just 4 years. And that can happen over and over again if we get organised, and that's what we're trying to do. The last point I'd say is, for me, in support of Patricia and all of the governments who are charged with raising their ambition, and we hope to see a lot more of that next year, and on behalf of this whole community of non-state actors, and there's an amazing wave of brilliant, committed people working on this, and it's very hard and it's very complicated. What we're aiming to do is get to Glasgow with at least 10 sectors where we can bring together people from all around that sector, from within the business community and from civil society and from cities and investors, and say, this is the way we're getting to zero, and here's the evidence that we started, and there's a lot of us already on that journey. We're going exponential, and it's up to everyone else to join that transition or get left behind if you're a private sector company, or be unelectable if you're an elected politician, because we think that it's inevitable. It has to happen. It has to happen really fast, which is why we call it a race. And increasingly, we see people wanting to join that race. But if we all do it together, then it de-risks it for everybody. This is one of the hard things for politicians. Right? If you go too fast as a politician, you don't get elected. So we've got to try and de-risk it for everybody, so the brave CEO, the brave mayor, the brave minister actually get rewarded for their bravery by being seen to be the deliverers of what society is demanding and what the science demands.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's great to hear from what businesses are doing there, because, as you say, that is a vital part of how we're going to get to net zero. We're going to have some more questions about that in a moment. I can see that we've got questions coming through from our audience. And the first one I'm going to choose is actually one that I think that has been very much at the top of many people's minds around the world in the past week. It's from Richard Smith, and he's asking, what do you think the outcome of the United States presidential election means for the global response to climate change? Ms. Espinosa, I will take you first, please.
Thank you, Fiona. And of course, while we know we are absolutely conscious of the fact that the election has not yet been formally, officially qualified. Of course, we have been following very closely even the process before the elections. The US is a very important partner to our process, has been an important partner and an important leader in many moments in our process. So this certainly is a development that we look at with great interest. And we are, of course, happy to hear that President-elect Biden has mentioned that one of the first actions in his government will be rejoining the Paris Agreement. So we have always said, even during the time where we were waiting for the departure of the US from the Paris Agreement, that we are ready to work with the US government in addressing any issue that they may have, because we really need everybody on board in this fight against climate change. So we look forward to that. We stand ready to support any effort in this direction.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned, of course, earlier the importance of coming forward with NDCs, which are these plans, these nationally determined contributions. Of course, the US will not be able to make that deadline, even under President Biden, as he wouldn't take office till next year. Do you hope for an NDC from the US next year?
Well, this is certainly one of the obligations under the Paris Agreement. We need to recall that as of the 4th of November, the departure of the US from the Paris Agreement has become effective. So at this point in time, the US is not formally a party to the Paris Agreement. So there is no way that we could expect an NDC this year. So if the US rejoins, and we certainly hope so, and they do it in a short period of time, we also hope that then we will see a very ambitious NDC. We take note also that the plans that have been put forward during the campaign by the now President-elect Biden are very ambitious. So we certainly hope that we will see those reflected in an NDC next year.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Nisreen, I'm going to take you now on what difference you think that a change of president in the United States will make.
Well, whether we acknowledge that or not, we cannot deny the fact that US is responsible for more than 17% of the global emissions. We cannot also deny that US is one of the leading countries when it comes to the global agenda around the world. And having a president elected to the US with a very much green heart, let me say, and very much ambition regarding climate change is very much welcomed by all of the society. I actually think that well, not only the importance of having a president that actually support the agenda of climate change, but also supporting the fact that the next generations need a planet to live in, and the fact that there is no jobs in a dead planet, and the fact that humanity was there and the planet nature was there actually before the economy. A lot of people think that the Paris Agreement itself was somehow designed to make everyone be able to stay in, especially after what happened at Kyoto Protocol, withdrawal of Canada, and then not be ratified by America in the first place. So the design of the Paris Agreement was set for every country to find a space, for every entity to find a way to express their climate action. And when they actually, it wasn't very much with the ambitions of the African and developing countries, but people find a consensus on the Paris Agreement. So when US actually left the Paris Agreement, there was a huge depression because we sacrificed a lot of things. For example, some people say in order to have a joint spirit of us, one who wants to save the planet, and then even of the tolerance we had regarding many issues, now US is leaving the Paris Agreement. But I think the tweet by the elected President Joe Biden that the US will rejoin the agreement in 77 days specifically is very much a good sign, because it says that he's a man of his word, and also using numbers, which is also a very good indicator, because that's how we can count days for the new US administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. And finally, Nigel, does this make a difference to businesses, do you think? Will we see more action as a result of the change of president?
I mean, well, first of all, I think it's important to say that, I mean, the community I work with is not just businesses, it's also very much cities, regions, and civil society. And I think actually that the power of the non-state actors is nowhere more relevant than in the States, because in a period when the federal government has very early on signaled its withdrawal from Paris and rolled back regulations that were driving forward in climate action, there's been a very quick response to the decision to withdraw, the creation of a coalition called We Are Still In, and something called America's Pledge. So many American states, cities, businesses, investors, universities, universities who are training the voters and the engineers and the politicians of the future, right? So that many of those have fought to say, and they've come to COPs and they've said, we're still in, we're fighting for it. We're going to make sure that America delivers on its plan, even if it's not held at the federal level. So that momentum has continued, and things, just look at California alone would be the 5th biggest economy in the world. It's committed to net zero 2045. Very, very ambitious, right? So that helps, and where California leads, often America follows. Also remember that economics of energy are on our side. I mean, although the current president was elected on a bring back coal ticket, America's burning 32% less coal now because people are shutting coal-fired power plants because they're bad for citizens' health, but also they're bad economically. And no one will invest in a coal-fired power plant in America now, because that's a 30-year investment, and it will definitely not last that long. So I think also it's worth recognizing that if you look at all the polling, like I think something like 70% of the electorate had climate as a very important or somewhat important issue. So climate is on is a campaign issue now, and that's people living in cities. And this has really been exacerbated by COVID. People understand that pulmonary health, the quality of the air we breathe, is very related to climate change, because the same things that cause dirty air that's bad to breathe cause climate change, burning coal and driving cars, right? So I think that for me, it's the good news for America. It's one of industrial competitiveness. I always say that in the 70s, American government and automotive industry got the response to the first oil crisis badly wrong. They kept on building big gas guzzlers as though they could dictate what the world would buy, as a result of which Americans drive a lot of smaller European and Asian cars now. Detroit has been in this fight with an EPA to wind back regulations. to make American cars less efficient, while the rest of the world is accelerating down the track to zero carbon electric vehicles. And as I've said, in UK will hear any day now. I think the EU next year, and China, California's. There's a sort of tug of war going on within America. That tug of war doesn't help business, because it's like, who do you back? And that means it slows down investment because it creates the risk. Business wants clarity. I mean, it's one of the remarkable things in the UK recently, and this consultation for the end of the combustion engine, 2 oil companies, BP and Shell, have said, we want the UK government to ban combustion engines in 2030. Kind of remarkable. The reason is they want clarity. They know it's going to happen. Uncertainty increases risk, and it means you waste money as a business. So I think it's good news for American business and for American citizens that they'll have clean air in their cities, and they'll have clear investment guidelines from a policy that is aligned with what the rest of the world is doing.
Thank you very much. Clarity of all kinds would be good. Thank you for that. We have another question from our audience that's looking at how things have changed because of the pandemic. Here we are, all meeting online. So how will the format of COP26 be changed? Ms. Espinosa, I'd like to ask you this, because obviously, as you said before, a lot of work is still going on behind the scenes with nations talking to each other and so on, and a lot of the technical work is being done by the UN. But will there come a point when you have to start negotiating online? Or is it even possible that we might not be able to meet physically for COP26 next year? And also, how will we ensure that civil society is represented in all these discussions? Please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that the current situation has obliged us to look at the process for the organization of the conference, taking into account different scenarios. We do not have the certainty, and I don't think anybody at this stage can say what will happen, where the world will be next year in November. Precisely because of that reason, and precisely because of the urgency of the situation, we need to be open and able to contemplate different scenarios. Now, virtual exchanges have been, I would say, have been productive. Yes, they are not the same as the in-person contacts, and that has been really a very difficult change to get into the minds, not only of delegations from countries, but even for us in the Secretariat. Preparing a meeting that is going to take place in person is something very different from preparing a meeting that is going to take place virtually. It has required a lot of work. But what have we learned so far? One positive thing that we have learned is that virtual meetings have allowed a broader participation than what we would have normally with in-person meetings. And this has been very clearly the case of the Race to Zero campaign that is still currently going on. So in a way, I think that we need to see also the benefits of these IT technologies that are allowing more inclusive conversations. More difficult, challenging, sometimes also with technical problems that need to be addressed, but more inclusive. So in that regard, I would say that we are working very hard in order to, together with the UK government, of course, to build an infrastructure that will allow us to really look for the most inclusive conference by combining, hopefully in person, and also virtual means. To be very frank, we have not yet discussed the possibility of not being able to meet in person. I personally think that if that were to be the case, we cannot delay decision making and we cannot delay progress in our process. I think the expectations and the need to address these very critical situations all over the world would not allow us to go out and say, okay, listen, we cannot meet again, so we will delay our work for another year or whatever time it is. So I think we need to it's a time where we need to make use of all these technologies, but also of be creative in looking for solutions and making sure that we, in spite of all these challenges, we can move forward. It's a big change, but I think it's the reality and we need to deal with it. And those of us who are in a position of responsibility for decision making have the moral obligation to bring the process forward. So I certainly hope that we will have the opportunity to meet in person. Right now we have 2 sessions of the subsidiary bodies planned for next year, plus of course the conference. I hope that we can do them in person. Although I suspect that we will have to still make big changes to our normal procedures because of the physical distance that may be needed in order to put health and security at the center of our operations. But if that were not to be the case, I think this would be the time to really look at possibilities of advancing work virtually, even if we were to try to bring together some common understandings that eventually could be formalized with decision making later on. I think the world has changed, and this is something that we need to acknowledge, keep our minds open, and overall keep the political will to bring the process forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I have a question for you, Nisreen. Our audience wants to know how schools can get involved in helping to tackle climate change. What would you tell them?
Well, yeah, this is a very important question because we kept talking on the decision making and the policy level climate action, but we haven't talked about the grassroots level action, which sometimes even more impactful than the higher level climate action and negotiation and so on. Actually, by learning to move from consumers to productive people, this will help a lot. Will help young people when they are growing. They will help the teachers themselves, and we will have a very much mature generations comparing to the previous generations. This transformation from being consumers and being productive people can mean a lot of things. Can mean actually stop consuming resources by not using private cars and instead using public transport, by recycling, for example, plastic, or even stop using plastic and find other solutions, by planting trees and stop the deforestation. And it's very important to work with young people in that age, because whatever you build inside of them when they are so young, they grow with it. And we will have a very much, let me say, a better humans in their behavior, in their activity, in their daily lifestyle, and so on. Also, for example, a continent like Africa, where more than 60% of the population are actually below the age of 20. Schools actually plays a huge let me say, population. And it's somehow something very strategic, because this small population will grow up and be actually the policymakers, the decision makers, and the voters for the politicians in the future. So what we grow today, we actually eat the fruit of it in 10 or 20 years maximum. There's a huge like literature inside of the internet, inside of the civil society organization. We can read more about the Action for Climate Empowerment, which is Article 12 in the Paris Agreement, and it falls under Article 6 of the Convention, in how to make public awareness, education, public participation part of the momentum for the climate action. And I think more we focused on the grassroots and the people in the rural areas, more we get results, because they are in the front line. They will be the first people who will get hit by any climate crisis. They will be the first people who need adaptation, and they will be the most vulnerable sectors, especially those who are depending on natural resources, such as the farmers, the pastorers, and so on. So it's not only schools, but the local communities in different formats, and in the rural areas.
Great, thank you very much. And Nigel, I think you'd like to come in there. And in fact, Nigel, while I've got you, you can address the schools question as well, but I'd also like you to ask as well. We've got Dom Clark, who wants to know what leaders there are. What are the leading businesses and companies around the world setting the standard for net zero? Perhaps you could pick out an example or two. But yes, carry on.
So, yeah, first of all, I just wanted to follow up. First of all, on the COVID and access, on the plus side, Nisreen is with us, right? If we might have had a meeting in London where I would have gone and Patricia might have come over from Bonn, but there's no way Nisreen would have come from Sudan to join us in London. So that's the real plus, that we have Nisreen's voice in a conversation like this. As Patricia says, there are real challenges as well, right? So it's sort of glass half full, glass half empty. I just wanted to build on Nisreen's point that it's so important that we bring young people into this conversation, of course, to educate them about the challenges, but also because they're going to be the part of the solution. They're the engineers of the future. If anyone's interested, there's a great program that's been launched by Ashton Trust in the UK, trying to get schools to commit to and then help them be on the way to being net zero by 2030. We're partnering with that. If you just Google letsgozero.org, you'll find it. And so there's 32,000 schools in the UK. My vision would be that by the time we get to Glasgow, 32,000 schools have committed to going net zero by 2030. And then all the teachers, all the parents, all the kids are part of that process. It forces you to then look at things like, how do we drive to school? London's got a program called School Streets, where they take cars off streets so that you don't have kids breathing polluted air when they go to school. And I've been talking with Gonzalo about maybe trying to then replicate that program in Chile, and then we just create a toolkit. So if there's any philanthropists out there who want to help every school in the world go net zero by 2030, we can put you in touch with Ashton Trust, because there's a growing partnership there. Because Nisreen's right. We want the people to feel agency when they're part of changing their world. Yes, we need leaders of companies and governments to act, but this is something I always say, we need Gonzalo and I have this fancy title of high-level champion, but we need 8 billion climate champions, right? So to Dom's point about businesses, I mean, there's over 1,000 businesses now committed to net zero. If you go to the UN Global Compact's Business for 1.5 webpage, you can see a list of all of them. Gonzalo is one of the founders of and the real drivers of the B Corp movement. So there's a lot of B Corps committing, and I think that by the time we get to Glasgow, they'll probably have 3,500 B Corps who are all committing. But there are also many big companies in many sectors. From the consumer goods companies, everyone knows about Unilever and Nestle being very committed. When we launched, we had Rolls-Royce. That's an interesting company. Their business is power transmission in airlines, so but they're committed to being part of the transformation to electric flight and alternative forms of power. So really, we now have cement. Dalmia Cement in India. Cement is produced in a process which, in its carbon dioxide. They've committed to being net zero by 2040. As I said, Mercedes, inventor of the combustion engine, committed to being net zero 2039. So, and these commitments are full value chain, right? They're not just we tidy up our offices or our factories. So it's pretty radical what they're committing to. But the great thing is when somebody like that commits, it's like we've seen Amazon, Apple, Walmart, all committing. That means everyone in their value chain. So Walmart have a gigaton project where getting their suppliers to reduce. So again, if the system's effect, the more people commit, the easier it is for other people to commit. So there's a lot of leaders, but you can go and on those websites and find the full lists and find out if a company who's saying they're committed to net zero climate neutral has made a robust commitment, and if not, hold them accountable. Because it's not acceptable to make a flaky commitment when you just think you can buy all the offsets and do nothing. Science-based targets requires people to reduce in line with the science and only then offset in a robust way.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for that reminder there, Nigel. That's fantastic. We're going to run out of time shortly, so I'm going to put one question each to each of our panelists just to answer very quickly in the final few minutes. Nigel, I'm going to take you first, which is that we've still got companies who are investing in fossil fuels, extracting fossil fuels, building their businesses on fossil fuels. How can we still have that, and what needs to happen?
Well, I think a lot of things need to happen. I mean, and it's happening, right? Investors need to hold those companies to account and say, there's a lot of pressure on full divestment. I'm actually of the school that companies with deep balance sheets, an understanding of risk management, geopolitics, and their ability to pull off massive engineering projects like we need to build like hundreds of floating wind turbines in the North Sea, for example, could be part of the solution, but they need to make the pivot. So I think we've started to see some of those companies commit to reducing or stop reducing their exploration, reducing their production of hydrocarbons and pivoting. But investors need to hold them to account, and they are. You've seen a lot of value come out of hydrocarbon companies as a result of divestment and that, things like that. I mean, governments also, of course, we're starting to see some governments put an end to exploration in their territories. And I think, there's been some speculation that the UK government might change its export finance rules to stop using taxpayers' money to support overseas hydrocarbon projects. So those are the kind of things I think you need. And then there's the normal things like carbon pricing. We've seen very effectively how carbon pricing has helped accelerate the end of coal in the UK. So the right fiscal incentives to new industries before they get down the cost curve enough. So that's worked really well in renewables. Now we see renewables being the most competitive source of power around the world. And then investors and civil society holding businesses to account to stop really the waste of either taxpayers or investors' money in continuing to invest in industries which we know are going to die. So they're investing in what we call stranded assets, and that needs to stop.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Nigel. That's great. Nisreen, I'm going to take this question for you. Some of our audience are very worried about the issue of climate change refugees around the world, people fleeing from the impacts of climate change. Do you think that's going to be an increasing problem? I'll have to keep it quite brief, though, please. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this question. Yes, it is, and we are actually seeing it right now. Many people who actually migrated from Sudan, even if legally or illegally, were because they were actually farmers, but they couldn't do their farming anymore. I'm a bit worried that the conversation is somehow moving to one side. For example, the race to zero. I hope if we had a race to resilience, for example, to have both sides, and also the possibility of having a virtual COP at the end if we didn't make it would also make the chances of having a very proper representation from the undermined countries or least developed countries will be also an issue, and this is a very much concern of us. And but of course migration is a very much increasing issue, and it will increase very much more in the future if we did not do something.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very succinct answer there. Thank you very much. And finally, Ms. Espinosa, I'll come to you. I'm going to, one of our audience has asked that we've heard from Greta Thunberg recently that she has been very critical of climate summits, arguing that they contain a lot of empty words and greenwash without the actual commitments from politicians and the actions that we need to see now. Do you agree with Greta, or do you take a different view of climate summits?
Well, I think that we need to see, first of all, we need to see the climate summits, as they are called, which are actually the conference of the parties to the different legal instruments, but the climate summits, as many call them, as moments in a continuous process. We should not see those gatherings as an end itself. And yes, multilateralism is a very complicated issue. If we think about the fact that here we are talking about bringing together in our process 197 countries, with all of them with different realities. So the magic of multilateralism is that you need to bring all those realities together, and at the same time, everybody needs to see itself somehow reflected in that pathway, in that framework that is built through multilateralism. And there is no other way that we can address global problems. So the Paris Agreement, which in my mind is really a covenant of hope with the world, it really shows the way how we can all together work nationally, regionally, in our businesses, in our communities, in order to pursue one better good for all of us. So I of course, most of my diplomatic career of over 35 years, I have spent in multilateral fora. I strongly believe in multilateralism. I believe the only real tool that humanity has to build a better future is dialogue and cooperation. So yes, those commitments need to be translated into actions, and those actions need to be delivered, but that delivery is also a process that needs to be done in a fair, open, and transparent way. And here I would just underline also, and this relates also to the point about energy transition, the importance of looking at a fair transition, a transition that really allows everybody to bring on board, that allows us to bring everybody on board, where we are not dividing the world into the good people and the bad people, but we are actually bringing the world together towards this better future that we need and that we have the moral responsibility to deliver.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that reminder of what climate conferences can be and what we can achieve as a world. It is now almost 5 years since the Paris Agreement was adopted. It was an incredible event then. I was there in the hall, and it was one of the most astonishing things I've ever seen. And the most astonishing thing was, as you say, the whole world, 197 countries, coming together as one. So thank you very much to all of our panelists. We look forward to seeing how COP26 develops, and of course at The Guardian we will be following that very, very closely. So just with an eye to that, our audience will be invited to fill in a survey after this, so please do, because that will help us to develop our programme. And of course, I can remind you also about The Guardian's own climate pledge, where we've pledged to do our bit towards reaching net zero, and also our bit as a media organisation in covering these issues, which is very important. And in fact, we will also have another event coming up very soon that you may be interested in. It's on the Green Deal, the Green New Deal, that a lot of people are talking about, a sort of green recovery from the COVID crisis, and that will be featuring Noam Chomsky, a name that I'm sure is familiar to many of you. So if you look for that on our website, you may find that of interest as well. But thank you very much to everyone who has joined in tonight. Thank you for your excellent questions. We couldn't get every single one of them. A few of them we had to combine and so on. But I think we got most of the questions answered there. And thank you most of all to our panellists for joining us tonight. We were incredibly privileged tonight to have such a distinguished panel. Normally, of course, we'd break into applause at this point. I'm afraid we can't do that quite so well virtually, but to our panellists, you are very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Thank you, Nusri. Thank you very much. Thank you.